I believe that story is
Zimmerman's famous pig.
Which one of the two was an armed and dangerous authority figure, trained in MMA and firearms? George Zimmerman. Note: George Zimmerman is a bald, stocky male. For anyone, even a trained weightlifter or fighter, to bang his head onto the ground, it would take a lot of strength, plus 2 hands around his neck. Because George Zimmerman is bald, so to grab his slippery wet face or neck in the rain and bang it hard enough into the ground to cause injury, especially while wearing a long-sleeved hoodie and a second long-sleeved sweatshirt, would mean Trayvon Martin was freakishly strong, and George Zimmerman was freakishly weak like a baby, because thrusting from the neck would cause the whole upper body and chest to have to move with the head in order to cause injury. And why would an armed and trained wannabe cop with MMA cage fighting skills like George Zimmerman be screaming for help if he had a gun that hadn't been discovered by the so-called suspect yet? And even if he was on his back fighting over the gun, how's Trayvon Martin covering his mouth while also banging his head up and down viciously? And why doesn't George Zimmerman's voice, if that were truly him screaming, reflect the banging head and choking of his apparent pencil neck? I don't hear muffled head banging and choking neck thrust interruptions in these screams. Besides, why would anyone schooled in MMA fighting tactics be screaming for help while getting their head bashed on concrete, instead of focusing on tightening their chest and neck muscles, while turning over onto their stomach and squirming free, which would momentarily have cut off the voice and air supply, thus preventing any chance of screaming anyway? You can tell by the long-winded screaming that's heard on the initial 911 call that this experienced MMA fighting wannabe cop isn't the one screaming like a scared child, while he's helplessly laid out on his back in the muddy rain, while being beaten as he struggled to survive as this crazy super kid, slim Trayvon Martin, was weighing down his lungs, covering his mouth, telling him he was going to die, punching his face, breaking his nose, banging his rubbery pencil neck-held head violently up and down 23 times against the concrete, while raining down punches in a ground-and-pound manner, and, oh yes, with his 13th hand, struggling to unholster, seize control of and then execute precious little Georgie boy with his own gun, that this absent-minded God-given gift to the Neighborhood Watch program George Zimmerman must have forgotten was even there. Because George Zimmerman wants us to believe that it was him that was screaming bloody murder in a hysterical and scared teenage voice. Apparently, this poorly defenseless shadow of a man, George RoboCop Zimmerman, was squirming to get away, while retrieving his gun because he knew he was about to be executed by this demon-possessed super child, Trayvon Martin. George Miracle to be alive Zimmerman was finally able to end this demon-possessed, crazed super child's life merely as a last resort to save his own angelic, delicate, frail, frightened and defenseless flower-like existence. Because George Zimmerman, who apparently was about as skittish and unpredictable as Barney Fife in the Haunted Mansion, apparently went after this unknown suspicious black suspect, as he called him, as if he, Zimmerman, were unarmed, never even pulling his gun, and he did this on a dark and rainy night, right after telling the 911 operator that the suspect didn't seem right, was on drugs, was reaching into his waistband, and had something in his hand. No good, or he's on drugs or something. He's got his hand in his waistband. Yeah, he's a black man. I won't say he's got a button on his shirt. Like he's something's wrong with him. Yeah, he's kind of checking out. He's got something in his hands. I don't know what his deal is. Okay, let me go get that. judge in the Florida judicial system, so he is an ally to all law enforcement agents. I also believe that most law enforcement agents and officers would gladly lie and create evidence to save the life and set free the son of Florida, Judge Robert Zimmerman.
Justice, every cop is a criminal. All the civil saints.
George Zimmerman also had a great relationship with the Florida Police Department as a neighborhood watch captain, plus his best friend is an ex-cop and the current Sky Marshal. Zimmerman told the nurse when he was initially taken into custody that he had injuries caused by mixed martial arts fighting he was taking as a form of sleep therapy. I believe this could also mean he was irritable and bothered by someone or something that was going on in his life, like maybe his obsession with staying up late and watching for, then catching his community prowlers. Furthermore, it's my opinion that the bloody injuries of George Zimmerman could have been created or deceptively enhanced days or hours after the initial altercation, possibly by purposely aggravating healing MMA injuries that Zimmerman had gotten during previous mixed martial arts fights. Photo number 2 was allegedly taken just 5 hours after photo number 1. Re-aggravated injuries do heal much faster, or was photo 2 actually taken before he purposely re-aggravated his nose injury? Then photo number 1 was taken to bolster his defense with a law enforcement conspiracy involved. I also believe that all of the booking photos, including the photo taken by the Asian guy that shows only grass and a head, could have been false station booking photos created by the Illuminati law enforcement facility in the days or hours after the initial attack, simply to protect a fellow Illuminati judicial family member. I also believe that it's possible that racist elements within the Florida Police Department that might have responded to George Zimmerman in the past may have had told Zimmerman or hinted to him that he should handle the problem himself if he were to encounter blacks in his area that were up to no good burglarizing houses and prowling around at night in his neighborhood, and then to simply call it standing his ground. It's a known fact to many I've met throughout my life that many law enforcement systems, stations and jails are secretly run by racist elements, societies and or groups. And that's why the Florida police initially released George Zimmerman and called it a justifiable homicide. However, mounting national protests arose and negative backlash caused the Florida District Attorney to appoint a special prosecutor to head up a renewed investigation on this case. Trayvon Martin was killed on February 26, 2012. George Zimmerman was taken into custody and then released without being charged after just 5 hours in custody, and then on March 22, 2012 a special prosecutor was appointed to take over the investigation, but it wasn't until April 11, 2012 that the special prosecutor filed the charge of murder in the second degree against George Zimmerman, so about 44 days after the murder, George Zimmerman was finally charged with the crime. This 44-day reprieve from justice gave George Zimmerman and his father, the judge, ample time to reach out to friends in high and low places and to then put together the current array of false evidence, including injury photos and witnesses who may in actuality not have witnessed anything at all. And for over a year now there's been no talk of Trayvon Martin doing anything but rushing home to see the All-Star game with fruity iced tea and a bag of candy. And now suddenly there's talk that a Slim Jim car burglarizing tool was found in the bushes right near where the confrontation happened 5 days after the murder. So irrelevant his wife, His grandmother or his dog could have easily planted it there. Now remember, all this is just my own speculation, based on my personal beliefs, understanding and innate knowledge. However, there are also many indisputable facts that could bring into question the motives of some witnesses. For instance, it was revealed that the ex-cop and best friend who taught George Zimmerman how to shoot hid him for 6 weeks after the Trayvon Martin shooting, and accompanies him to every police interrogation. Osterman previously worked in the local sheriff's department and has worked as an air marshal for the past decade. And why did the Florida detectives take Zimmerman to the crime scene and let him leave his little defense reenactment on film, as if it's their job to protect his standing his ground self-defense story? Also, why is it that his wound was cleaned up and bandaged days after the incident, yet he saw a hospital nurse who didn't clean it up at all, nor did she stop the bleeding with a butterfly stitch, and nor bandage that night when he was taken to the hospital with the cops? Mark Osterman took the stand for the prosecution on July 2, 2013. His entire testimony was all hearsay and right out of George Zimmerman's defense playbook. To me, it kind of seemed like the defense and prosecution teams were both working for Team Judge Zimmerman. And why would the prosecutor even call this guy, Mark Osterman, to the stand? Everything he said was defense-serving hearsay coming from him as the killer's mouthpiece, and this is the same cop that hid George Zimmerman for 44 days, so of course he's going to lie for Zimmerman. Every word he said should have been vigorously objected to as hearsay. This was George talking on his stand through this police puppet. Except now George can't be questioned on it. This shows me the prosecution and the defense are allied to free Zimmerman. Remember, this is just my opinion, but to me, this witness reeks foul with the secret backdoor alliance between the prosecution and the defense. Because I believe that what's more important than justice in this case to the district attorney and the Sanford judicial system in Florida is the covering of their asses and the backing up of their initial findings in this matter of it to being a stand your ground case of self-defense. It was the Sanford district attorney's office that initially declined to prosecute George Zimmerman, and then allowed him to be released without indictment. Now they are called upon to prove that their initial decision not to prosecute was flawed. This is why they deemed it a special prosecutor. This is like a mother appointing a son to determine if his brother was doing the job right. But at the end of the day, they still live and cooperate under the same roof and probably have each other's back, first and foremost. Another thought I had in this case is regarding Trayvon Martin's older brother Javarius Fulton. George Zimmerman stated that he thought Trayvon Martin was closer to his own age. On Friday, July 5, 2013, Javarius Fulton testified in this court case. Javarius Fulton is closer to George Zimmerman's age and for many years has lived in a house neighboring the spot where Trayvon Martin was gunned down. I wonder if over the years, Javarius Fulton or his group of friends might have had run-ins and words with George Zimmerman over cutting through his housing tract, and George Zimmerman had a vendetta and suspicion that someone in that group was behind the burglaries and then mistakenly assumed Trayvon was a guilty party.